The UK in-depth special report. Warning, this video contains factual material that US and UK citizens may find offensive. Don't blame me for what your governments say or do. That's rather why we're here, isn't it? You really think it's their first time? In this video, we're going to go deep into charts, analysis, and what it takes to offer you the see whatever I say next you get in the chart updates. Not for behind-the-scenes entertainment, but because a fundamental claim is at stake. Was I right to claim that lockdown had zero effect in the UK, which is bizarre? As such, many of you may want to skip this video, but if you really want the deep assurance that I need at least, that my results are sound, then you may want to watch. You don't need to follow every step. Just getting that I've gone to a lot of trouble to make sure I'm not talking nonsense may be a useful result. So watch, don't watch, entirely up to you. And yes, I do go to a lot of trouble to make sure I'm right. Big issues are at stake, and we do need that reassurance. I was writing to Peter Hitchens when I had a horrifying insight. My claim is based on a projection from the 26th, but the 26th was the official day. In practice, we went into lockdown on the 23rd, the day of Boris Johnson's announcement. What if in those 3 days the curve had magically adjusted to the new lockdown rate? Then of course the curve might or should match the projection. The projection was based on the new post-lockdown trajectory. Ouch. I needed to go deeper and see whether I was entirely justified without doubt as to where the curve was headed before lockdown. It was that curve I needed to identify. That's what we're going to look at now. As it happens, as I realized only later, with an incubation period of 5 to 10 days, anyone arising as a case on the 26th did so having caught the virus on or prior to the 21st before lockdown, so I was always safe. Nevertheless, it turned out to be a valuable exercise. In the process, we'll get a number of new or modified results. We'll establish that we hit peak on the 11th and 12th, yesterday as I write this. Our infamous UK CMO, 530,000 deaths, says it's 8 weeks away. Our chief scientific advisor says 2 weeks. Glad they're keeping us accurately informed. Only the Telegraph, by not relying on government statements, got the date right, predicting this week and citing the 11th. On the 11th we were pre-peak and on the 12th we were post-peak, as you'll see. But basically, hats off to the Telegraph, and yes, if you want facts you have to do it yourself. If you want fiction, then government is fine. Here's what I had to work with. Raw data from the World Health Organization daily situation reports, painstakingly typed in. And for this I typed in every day for a few key countries: Italy, Germany, Norway, UK, US and Canada, rather than data every 3 days as suffices normally for chart updates. Noting each country's population in millions, I then scale up or down to cases total per 100 million population. Subtracting the previous day's total from the next day's figure, I get the cases declared on that day. The end result is some rather jagged charts, as you see below. Italy, Germany and Norway are past peak. They get to go home soon, or go out, or whatever applies. Now even the government must admit the crisis is over. Britain is still rising, sadly. A bit surprising, given how everyone else gets to go home or go out, and quite substantially, as you can see. No hope of relaxing the lockdown yet. Disappointing, even a little disturbing, but we're obviously not out of the woods yet. Consider something though. This is the chart without the data point for the 12th. Now we're at peak, at twin peaks, and it'll fade away and we can all go home or go out. But that next data point, if it's real, we're obviously not at peak. But what if we know we're at peak by other means? Then what does that data point mean? If this is the true picture, and that's where we're going next, and it ought to be going down but isn't, then what? If the virus is behaving and cases are going down, then how come the reported cases are going up? If another mode of analysis tells us we're at peak and the extra data point is an anomaly, then as a weird one we'd hope to move past it. But if it's not so much an anomaly as artistic airbrushing? It's just data, right? It may not seem like a big deal to you, but to me it's horrifying. If we can't rely on the governments to provide basic data, we're operating blind. We have no check on their behaviour. We're going to go into some heavy analysis, and during the analysis I ignored the endpoint for good reason. It's an outlier, a data point that can't be relied upon and which disrupts a perfectly sensible picture. Anomalies and outliers occur in analysis all the time, a bit like a heckler in a stage show. It's just one of those things. But it can be really a nuisance, especially if the heckler won't shut up, and these outliers keep coming. If it's not an outlier, but a real data point is joined by others later, then we have a real problem. Women will be familiar with this. You know your partner should have turned right, but he just keeps on going. Here's what that could look like. The real virus is headed down, but the government keeps reporting otherwise. This is the China lied scenario. But it's here at home in the UK. At the moment, it's a concern for good reason. Let's take a look at what would happen if this turned out to be real. The only weapon I have against government lies is using their own data against them. You can't ignore my opinion because it's not mine nor opinion. It's the government's data. It's using their own data against them. What happens if I lose that edge? It's like a back door. What if they close it? What if they simply choose, and it's terrifyingly simple indeed, to report what they want to be true instead of what is in fact true? I use UK government road safety data to show that there's only one cause of accidents, determinant of rate, and that's traffic density. More traffic, more accidents, more injuries, less speeding. More speeding, fewer injuries. Speeding is a symptom of an informed choice, not a cause. I use US prosecution evidence to show that the US government lied about the direction and the nature and size of the vehicle that hit the Pentagon on 9/11, and then fabricated evidence in a criminal trial, a criminal offence. One of these shots is a B-757, the nose, about to strike the Pentagon, according to the US government at least. The other is a patch of smoke from another shot, copied and pasted onto a clean background. Care to tell me which is the B-757? I'll put it full screen for you. Now, I'm not saying that oil, US exceptionalism, Central Asian reserves access Afghanistan, taking down 4, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, enemies of Israel, a $4 trillion defense budget boost, a $1.2 trillion corporate boost, are a reason to bin a couple of airliners, an AGM-86 and 3 towers that were an asbestos liability. Or that first responders are on video reporting firecracker chains of explosions. Or that survivors fleeing WCC-1 or 2 reported massive underground explosions. Or that seismic recorders showed massive explosion tremors before the buildings collapse. No, certainly not. No one could possibly care so little about American lives that there'd been 3,000 of them plus another 3,771 US military in Iraq. They'd have to be monsters, the kind of people that have so little regard for people that there'd be allegations of mass euthanasia, mass enforced vaccination, mass enforced sterilization, the kind of totalitarian control we haven't seen since Hitler and Stalin. So you know what? Forget it. It's just one of those remarkable things that in 3 different scenarios the government has left a back door open to show that they lie. As long as they honestly report data, they're vulnerable. But what if they stop doing that? What if they want to scare the people and instruct doctors to record any death within 60 days of testing positive as a COVID-19 death? What if they instruct doctors to not record deaths as pneumonia, but as COVID-19, and don't worry about the testing? COVID-19 is fine. What if they do that? Ironically, that doesn't worry me in the least. It's like road safety data, 100 slight injuries and 10 serious injuries per death. As long as you leave slight and serious alone, you can distort deaths as much as you like. Do too much, and you look ridiculous and get caught. But if they choose to revise or rework the daily data, then all bets are off. If they say that 100,000 Americans died today from COVID-19, then I have no way of countering that. If they say that mass graves are needed for 1 million dead this week, I have no way to counter that. If we can't see what they're doing in some fashion, then the media becomes the only source of fact. And the fact you hear is whatever the government wants you to hear. And that's truly, utterly terrifying. Let's see how this plays out in this scenario. So the virus behaves, cases fall, but we never know. With the death toll now reaching 50,000 a day, the UK government has announced mass vaccination as the only hope of slowing this virus. It is already out of control. It is an existential crisis for Britain. The UN is rushing 5 tons of urgently needed vaccine to Britain. Bill Gates says he will personally fund enough vaccine for 10 million Britons to save lives. The NHS Emergency Funding Relief Bill has just passed with unanimous support in the House of Commons. £580 billion will be immediately made available. A further £460 billion is on call from the World Bank. Henry Kissinger denounced the latest moves as too little, too late. We urged Britain to take this threat seriously, but they wouldn't listen. Fortunately, in the US, we were able to implement a mandatory vaccination program far sooner. Absurd? Alarmist? How do you know? How would you know anything? Would you go round to each hospital to count ambulances, trolleys? Would you do a Capone and check the audit for hope of catching the government out? You'd have to. If 5.2 million people died last July needing special caskets, then how come the NHS report only shows order for 15,000 caskets? It would be absurd, maybe we'd catch them, but hey, NHS audit? What audit? Never heard of such. So never mind that I've just given you a hint that if you weren't already, you should go back and be suspicious of 9/11 and speeding policy. Here's where we are incredibly vulnerable to being shut out of the loop. If that happens, all bets are off. My wife and I go live somewhere nice, Barbados for choice, and hope we never come back here, Earth, again. Sadly, we no doubt will, but thank God we'll have no memories of this life, I hope. It would be too depressing. Is it real? This is real. You can't see it, most likely, but this chart has peaked according to the virus. It has not peaked according to the government-reported data. That scares the bejesus out of me. But let's move on. Now remember, this is not one of my curves, which are the total case curves, as below. On the left is the days count, below is the total count. In fact, this is a sneak peek at the end result, our super cool, ultra-accurate no-ship, for real, amazing future chart, but it's like a handcrafted Ming vase. There's no way I'm doing this 44 times every 3 days. But for the critical UK lockdown lie, it's worth it. Because of that outlier, that could presage the end of trusting UK data. It's worth it. China lied. China's a prince compared to what we've been faced with and are now facing. And if any of you should think, bang, disaster, siren emergency, finger they did it, whoosh, first rocket fired, 9/11 or COVID-19, does it matter? Crisis, response, solution. The age-old game. And yes, I'll put it full screen, but these are the outcome pre-lockdown projections and the pink UK. Actual is tracking perfectly, which is insane. Even I think 66 million people being locked down should make a difference, unless it did, but they chose not to report it. Watch this space, I will be. So, time to go. If you made it this far, congratulations, grab a beer. We'll take a short commercial break, then we're going deep. Stay if you'd like to see my world, the kitchen where it gets all hot and steamy and screaming loud before the waiter calmly presents your foie gras. Welcome back to tonight's episode of How Am I Gonna Get? The answer is very, but first, special guest André le Chef is going to be showing us how to create his specialty, le graphe extraordinaire. I have to say, André, it looks amazing. Oui, bien sûr, c'est une création entièrement élégante, a little data, some herbs and loving care, and I think you'll enjoy it very much. I'm sure, so because André is foreign, we've asked Andrew Mather to dub for him. So Andrew or André, go ahead. Thank you, Darren. On the left is the final slide, similar to our curves from the daily updates. Below left is the day curve, cases per day, for the graph on the left. On the right is the day curve of South Korea, which we've seen before. All of these are idealized virus progressions following normal distributions. Don't ask me why they work, ask a statistical epidemiologist like Knut Witkowski. All we need know is that Imperial College say it should look like a normal distribution. South Korea does look like a normal distribution. And although it may not be obvious yet, it turns out that the UK has been following a normal distribution. If it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's a COVID-19 death. But this chart may be the one thing that saves us from big fake data. How do we get there? Ideally, if it didn't matter, we'd just bring up a normal distribution, jiggle it around till we got the mean, standard deviation, offset, x-gradient and magnitude so that it looked good. None of which we'll explain, trust me, not a good idea. But in this instance, this could be the killer chart in court, so we want to have a rock-solid case and understanding. So let's go back to raw basics. Here's the raw World Health Organization daily situation report data, adjusted to a common 100 million population base, and subtracting previous from next day to get each day's new cases, which we can chart as we've seen. What next, Ridley? Well, we can see on those log scales that there's a gentle curl over. Each day may be getting bigger, kind of wild, but in general, but it's not exponential. So we're going to ask, what does each day's cases look like as a percentage or factor of the previous day? Ignore this next slide. I'll state a couple of examples for those curious about factors, but you don't need to understand. Much more important is to understand and witness the charts that we'll look at in a minute. Thus for 1, 2, 3, 4, it would be 100% times 2, 50% times 1.5, 33% times 1.3. The connection between percentage and factor, percentage equals factor minus 1. Percentage equals 1.5 minus 1 equals 0.5 equals 50%. 2, 1.5, 1.3. The factor is declining. 2, 4, 8, 16 times 2 times 2 times 2. The factor is constant, exponential. 2, 4, 16, 256 times 2 times 4 times 16, the factor is increasing dramatically. Let's look at the factors, Cn over Cp, the next day's cases divided by previous day's cases. It's not magic or difficult, you do this all the time with interest payments. I got 1% in interest last month is next equals previous times 1.01, the factor corresponding to 1%. If last year you were paid 50k and this year you're paid 55k, what's your percentage pay rise in the factor? 5k on 50 is 10%. The factor is 55 over 50 is 1.1. A 10% pay rise is multiply previous by 1.1. So let's look at the resulting factors for UK cases. I'm going to put it full screen so you can get familiar with it. There's nothing to get, nothing to see, it's just a squiggly line. Let's squish it a bit so I can talk to you. What do you notice? It's squiggly, oscillating. It's fat on the left, thinner on the right, then curls up to finish. Yep, we're going to have to pay attention to that later. Now let me tell you what you're really looking at. Yep, that squiggly line is really a straight line, a beautiful smooth line. How come the real world data isn't so easy? Well, short form is, imagine 5 hospitals have no telephone but send a carrier pigeon or runner with the cases that day, and the hospitals are 100 meters, 1 mile, 5 miles and 100 miles from headquarters. HQ receives a 100-meter message within a minute, the mile within an hour, but traffic and all case data doesn't get to the HQ from other hospitals even on the same day, and it might be 2, 5, 7 days later. Then there's patients. It's darn frustrating, but they just don't get ill according to a schedule. One day you get a couple, next a dozen, after that 7, then 15, then 13, then 24. It's chaotic, literally. It's not quite random. There's a pattern, climbing numbers, broadly like people showing up to watch a game, and then on the other side leaving a game. But it's not regular, it's not scheduled. Our job is to separate the signal from the noise. You can read this going, in fact it's remarkable how good you are at doing it. Even though there's only one word officially recognized at, I'll bet you understood you can do that quite easily. In fact, it's remarkable how good you are at doing it. So good that some people would have seen a B757 in that patch of smoke, even though the smoke is only 2 foot wide and the profile, massive round ball roughly, of a B757 nose is nothing like the squiggly patch of smoke. Why though do we know it's really a line? 2 reasons. I can channel that squiggly line into a straight line. And the curve we want on the left, if you do the factor thing, next day to previous day, it turns out to have a straight line. So our intuition and the theory of being a virus happen to agree. Lucky us. I didn't know that was how it was going to work out. I just got started, and by the time I'd done and looked at what it was supposed to look like, it turned out that my intuition and theory agreed. One last tweak and we were done. That's how this has evolved: observation, experimentation, realization. I'll skip the intermediate steps and fast track to the essence of the answer. What are we looking at here? How can we calm this line down? One thing would be to take an average, so we do. The dashed line is a 5-day average. It calms things down, but it's still pretty wavy. We're going to be shooting this thing forward a month to see where we get. Imagine trying to aim a sniper rifle on a dinghy. I'm sure there's someone out there saying, hell, I shot a seagull from 1,000 yards in 50-foot waves and a shark chewing my ass. Wow! Yeah, well, I'm sure most everyone gets the point. No, the best result would be a straight line. I mean, that's the nice thing about straight lines. They go on forever, and they're like straight, if you know what I mean. So that's what I tried. Here you can see we've got a converging channel, squeezing down to the end, and guess what? There's that last data point, just won't stay in like they should. Not alarming at the moment, not just yet. This is a quick mock-up. Once we knew we were close, we compared to the normal distribution and tweaked. I don't want to untweak my spreadsheet just to show you this. I love you, sure, but now if we're comfortable with those lines, we can take the average and use that for the one line that we'll need in a minute. Now, apart from anything else, what do you notice about the chart lines? The oscillations are curving, but getting less dramatic, so the channel narrows and the channel is sloping down. Great marble run. What else? What does it mean when that line hits 1? I was too busy looking for a good fit to appreciate this at first, but if yesterday's cases were 5, 3, 7 and today's factor is 1, then what's today's cases? 5, 3, 7 times 1 is 5, 3, 7. That's flat. That's what you find at the top of a hump, flat. And if the factor is 1 today and it's sloping down, decreasing, that means tomorrow it'll be less than 1, maybe 0.99. So if it was 1,000 cases before, then factor 1, 1,000 times 1 equals 1,000. Then today it's 1,000 cases before, again, and a factor 0.99 or 990. So as you'd expect, you get flat at the top and lower the next day. In short, factor equals 1 equals peak. Handy. Recall what we're going to do. CF my curves. We come to the end and then we launch a continuation curve that looks reasonable. And every day the rate of the growth of the virus declines, that slowing down line. And we get the characteristic curl over as the contagion finally settles down to basically nothing. We've used a guesstimate that was pretty reasonable as it turns out, but this will give a much more sophisticated result. It's like the grown-up version of my definitive projection video. If I'm blindly honest, I never used it because I realized the slope was artificially high for technical reasons, wasn't using a normal distribution, simple version. It was a good call. My eyeball method was out, as we'll see, but good enough to make the point that no, the UK isn't going to 530,000 dead. This just happens to be better. So what do I do? And let's skip to the result, jump back, and I'm going to give you a magic number, and it really is magic. Now I've labelled the columns because there's bound to be one person that wants to know, and that's healthy. So let me just get that out of the way. Hum to yourself for a minute. We use the Excel norm.dis function, use startx and diffx to create a left-right shift for the curve on the chart, and a compression which is also affected by standard deviation. Mean and standard deviation per usual, mag factor is a Y scaling factor. Jiggle around till the curve on your chart looks like you want it to look. Does that sound like manipulating? Sure. We want it to wrap our real and crazy squiggle data very much as we did with the lines. Whipping the real data up in red, you can see how up until the peak it oscillates wildly, but inside the yellow and blue channel. That wild stuff near peak and that wild radio aerial sticking out the top, either the virus has gone wild and it's just a dumb bio machine, or somebody has. The green and the dotted red lines are interesting. They're cousins. The green you get by multiplying each day's growth by a number. We can do that from here to maybe not eternity, but 100 or 1,000 data points, no problem. We wanted one line and ideally one number to represent that line, so that we could just do like an interest rate, D2 equals D1 times R, D3 equals D2 times R, and D4 equals D3 times R. Green is done like that. Green represents our best attempt to smooth the real world case down to one number. The red dotted is normal distribution jiggled to match the green. Now ladies, if your friend insists she's a size 10 and you wince, and no matter how hard she tries, she can't get in that dress, at what point do you tell her, "Hun, you ain't a size 10. Same here. If I couldn't wriggle my red dotted normal distribution line to fit my green hell this looks good line, then no matter what, it may be a great line, but it's not a normal distribution. As it turns out, barring that chaos at the top, it was looking good as a normal distribution all the way. Now, last bit of magic, we go back to the table I showed you. Look at the right hand column. I'll put it full screen. That's a lot of 99.04%. That means that on our perfect fit red dotted official normal distribution using Excel norm.dist, it turns out that the next day's growth in probability equals growth in cases scaled by mag factor is precisely the previous day's growth times 0.9904. So we knew we were close using a simple linear line next day equals today minus 0.01. We tried that with delta return next day in a normal distribution is minus 1.5, then minus 1.43, then minus 1.42, different numbers. We want one number. Try dividing. 149 over 151 equals 0.9904. 148 over 149 is 0.9904. Every day, the change in growth factor, growth slowing down, was 0.9904. We had our magic number. Odds are you're lost by now. If not, congratulations. It's hardly PhD maths, but what's the big picture? What it means is, and just as we'd been doing with our projections, we now had a more precise methodology to decide on the reducing growth factors. It's not rocket science, and we'd done well, but this was better. Why does it matter? Well, for a number of reasons. It means we can draw the continued or entire shape of the curve out to exhaustion, which will give us in theory a far more accurate estimate for final cases. It means we can test the lockdown effectiveness, because if the rate of growth decline doesn't change after lockdown, then lockdown didn't change the rate of growth at all. If the virus is stable all the way to the crazy stuff, then maybe the crazy stuff isn't the virus at all. I think if you got this far, you've done incredibly well. The point is that we have an important new tool for 3 scenarios that we want to deal with. Projecting the curve, or now simply providing a full curve to compare against, arguing lockdown against the government, detecting this ain't no virus, when a perfectly rational and mindless growth, it's a virus in a big petri dish called the UK, turns into something else. Whatever this frame should have shown, it would have embarrassed the US government. Bikini shot? Unlikely. Something that shouldn't have been flying at the Pentagon and exploding. Rather more likely. If, just when we're supposed to be at peak, someone realizes it's game over, why not just add a few points by hand? We could keep this game going forever. If we see that, and by the time I publish this I should have access to at least one more data point, then it's game over for UK data and it's war, pure and simple. 66 million people in lockdown, and they refuse to let us out, even by their own rules. That's tyranny, pure and simple. And here's the data point from the 13th April, back down, still above the channel. We will have to watch and see. At least fortuitously, we have a tool to monitor their actions. If it acts like a virus, fine. If not, we have a smoking gun. Thank you for listening or watching. I'm Andrew Mather, a 60-year-old Brit, mathematician, financier, technologist, husband, biker, pilot, healer, whatever. A bunch of stuff. Take care. Feel free to get in touch, andrew@peerlessreads.com or andrew@amather.com. Either should get to me.